Yes, welcome into Sports Bit. Betting and Insight today, Pauly and Teddy Wednesday, May 10th. Big game breakdown, pivotal game 5, Washington and Boston. Home teams won all 4 and covered 4 blowouts. We'll get to that game coming up, and that's it because we are ready for team previews. Deep dive, we start with the Arizona Cardinals. They are set at 7.5. That's their win total. We'll run that down coming up. Football. Close enough. All right, bad beats, bad bets, bad for the books. What a horror show for the Rockets. Kawhi Leonard doesn't play in the overtime. The Rockets get the money, but they lose the game. And I don't know what to call this because it was 86-85 at the end of the third quarter, and he did overtime to send it over the total, Teddy.
Yeah, I mean, literally, like at the end of regulation, you could have called the under a moose when you're sitting there 86-85 at the end of 3. You know, you're already in the 170s and you can't get over 216 after that fourth quarter of ugliness on offense, but goes over in the extra session. So we have to call it a bad bet. When you lose an under in overtime, it's a bad bet. But I mean, it was a bizarre game. You know, I mean, 99-99 with $1:37 left in regulation. And then only 2 points over the next, 4.5 minutes. And that 2 points was a tip-in of a missed shot by San Antonio. Oh, and then the 2 free throws by Houston. But really ugly shooting numbers. Fourth quarter and overtime, 15 of 51 from the floor between the two teams. Just 6 of 28 from beyond the arc.
Harden was tired. He stunk in overtime, but he was gassed. D'Antoni played 7 guys. Are you kidding me? 7 guys. Lou Williams is killing him. Lou Williams was 3 of 11, 0 of 5 from 3. It was a huge possession in the fourth quarter where he had a good look at a 3 and it was down and rattled back out. That would have put him up 6, I believe. Ariza 3 of 10, Gordon 4 of 13, and he's the anti-Mike Brown. Mike Brown played 13 guys in a playoff game earlier in the Utah series. D'Antoni played 7 guys, and Harden 4 turnovers down the stretch.
Yeah, I mean, Harden from 120 in regulation on, 0 of 4 from the floor with the 4 turnovers. And you talked about this, that for Houston, throughout the course of the series, we've seen either everyone shoots well or nobody shoots well. And when you have Williams, Ariza, Gordon, all struggling from the field, too much for Houston to overcome from straight up fashion. From a point spread perspective, Rockets backers did just fine last night. They don't care. Houston lost. Who cares? They got the money. But obviously, if you have any kind of future on Houston, if you were rooting for the Rockets to win the series, the loss significant, but not necessarily the final nail in the coffin. Obviously, they were only down 3-2, and San Antonio just lost the one guy they couldn't lose, Kawhi. You know, he hurt his knee, he hurt his ankle. The initial take on Thursday's game is probable, but he wasn't right in this contest, and you know, Manu was able to fill his shoes. I mean, Manu was unbelievable down the stretch in an OT. But if Kawhi's not right, Spurs going to have a tough time closing out this series. He's someone whose status we want to be pay very, very close attention to over the course of the next couple of days.
All right, let's go rapid fire here. Bad beats all over the place in Major League Baseball. One bullpen meltdown after another. Let's start with the Yankees and the Reds. 5-3 in the 4th inning. The total was 8.5. 5-3 in the 4th. That was the final score.
Well, yeah, I mean, on a night of bad beats in baseball, where every single bullpen, it seemed, was melting down in one form or another, the first one we're going to talk about is the bullpens that don't melt down. Sabathia and Edelman both were lousy. The bullpens as clean as it gets. When you're 5-3 in the 4th and you can't get over 8.5, that's a tough beat. And that's not the antithesis of a bullpen meltdown. Now it's all bullpen meltdowns.
Yep, Nationals-Orioles under 8.5. 1-1 in the 8th inning. It goes over in that one, too.
Yeah, and I mean, the Nats, they got one of the best teams in baseball, except for the closer spot. Eddie Romero got the call last night. He's blown 2 out of 3 save chances. You know, maybe this team goes out and gets a closer. Kelvin Herrera from Kansas City could be available, but the Nats bullpen was disastrous last night, cost them the win. And when you're 1-1 in the 8th and you can't catch the under 8.5, yeah, that's a tough beat.
Yep, Miami 5-1 lead in the 8th. Marlins bullpen blows it. Miami and under becomes St. Louis and over, and Tampa led 4-0 in the first against the Royals, and they lost at home in extra innings.
Yeah, I mean, the Rays' pen gives up 2 in the 6th, 2 more in the 7th, 1 in the 9th, and 1 in the 12th to lose. Stake to that early lead. Tampa's pen couldn't get the job done. Same story with Miami. That's a pair of struggling bullpens right now.
How about Seattle? Rallied back from 4+ run deficits twice. Wildest game of the night. They beat the Phillies.
Yeah, and this one didn't matter for the total. And the Tampa meltdown didn't matter for the total either. But this one, for the side, you're up. You got Philadelphia and you're up by 5, and then you're up by 4 late. Yeah, you're expecting to cash that bet. But Philly's bullpen, they used every key arm too. Watch out for them tonight. But the bullpen allows 3 in the 6th, 1 in the 7th, and then the game loser in the 9th inning.
How about a bad bet? Cubs game 1 of a doubleheader. Arrieta rocked again. He's not right, Teddy. It's been that way for almost a year now.
Yeah, I mean, he had nothing. 12 of the 23 batters he faced reached base. He had many walks and strikeouts. The ERA gets a break because 4 of the runs he gave up were unearned. Over his last 3 starts, he's given up 17 runs in 14 innings. Jake Arrieta, big red flag on this guy right now. And how about Mark Reynolds? How much does he wish he could have become a Rocky earlier in his career? 3 of 4 in the game, 3 run scores, 3 ribbies. He's hitting .336 with 12 home runs, really enjoying the mile-high air of Colorado.
Bad for the books. Rangers-Padres. It was a day game, bet up from 8 to 8.5. It was 11-0 Texas. They can't get enough of betting against Weaver. I don't blame him. He's batting practice. He throws 82 miles an hour. He's 0-4 with a 6.81 ERA. Padres 0-7 in his starts, outscored by 36 runs, Teddy. We got a graphic about the ERA decline, too.
Yeah, I mean, look at it. It doesn't get any clearer than this. This is the anatomy of a decline. Jared Weaver ERA. He went from an ace, 2011, guys, 2.41. Every year it's gotten worse and worse. This year he's 6.81, as you mentioned. The Padres are 0-7 in his starts, and bettors are lining up to find ways to fade him. When you're pitching at Petco and you can't keep the ball in the park, it's problematic. Books took a beating on the total in this one, in a game where one side was shut out, and it still flew over the total.
And one more. How about what happened with the Indians' 25-cent move? They shut out the Blue Jays. The markets love Carrasco.
Yeah, I mean, the books took a beating on this one as well. I mean, there's a group of bettors who have fallen in love with Cleveland, and Carrasco may be their favorite pitcher to back. It doesn't matter the price that they're laying with him. They're 5-2 in his starts this season. None of those games have closed shorter than -160, and that was on the road at Texas in the opener. Carrasco taking money, and the books did not like the result yesterday. Toronto couldn't hit him.
All right, NFL in the deep dive. Arizona Cardinals team preview up next. Wizards-Celtics Game 5 on SportsBit. Betting insight today on SBRpicks.com.
Go to SBRodds.com. Browse, compare, and shop live odds available at top online sportsbooks.
Back on SportsBit, betting insight today, Pauly and Teddy. Time for big game breakdown. As always, live odds, SBR odds, and sportsbook review. Make sure you're betting with a trustworthy shop out there. Game 5 in Beantown. Wizards and the Celtics series tied at 2. Home team 4-0 straight up in ATS. Celtics 4.5. 215 the total. Game 1, 123 to 111. Game 2, Celtics also win 129 to 119 in overtime. Game 3 and Game 4 all Washington 116 to 89 and 121 to 102. Washington an amazing plus 24 over the 4 games in regulation. And they turned around Game 4 in the third quarter with defense. Outscored the Celtics 42 to 20 in the third. 9 Boston turnovers, which resulted in 21 Washington points, Teddy.
Yeah, I mean, it was all the Wizards' quick hands in the passing lane. 6 steals in that third quarter alone. And when you're scoring 21 points over turnovers in one quarter, the other team's going to have a very hard time bouncing back from that. And you look at the defensive adjustments that the Wizards made against Boston spark plug Isaiah Thomas at halftime. This graphic shows it really well. First half, he's normal Isaiah. 17 points on 6 of 11 shooting. Celtics are +1 with him on the floor. Second half, they shut him down. Only 3 shot attempts. Only 1 of them made. 5 turnovers. -31 in his 12.5 minutes. So you ask, was it physical play or dirty play? Let me give you a couple of quotes that give you 2 differing opinions on that question. Markieff Morris, quote, We just have to corral him right. He's a small guy. At the end of the day, if he's got 3 players around him, how can you make a pass? How can you make a shot? That's basically what we're doing. Morris, of course, saying, hey, we're physical. No big deal. Thomas, quote, they were very physical. The refs were allowing them to hold and grab and do all of those things. I can't be allowed to be held and grabbed every pin down, every screen. I don't even shoot 1 free throw, especially in the third quarter. I may have hit the ground 5 or 6 times. The series returning to Boston, Isaiah didn't get the call, calling out the refs saying, hey, they're playing dirty. One would think Isaiah will get his fair share of free throw attempts in this one.
That's a good move, and I'm with you on that one. They were holding him. Now, it's a weird situation here with the schedule and a bad move by the NBA. You have extra days to prepare, only 1 game since last Thursday, so maybe you like Stevens over Brooks here with the time to adjust in the schedule. Stevens, quote, did a little bit more switching. Gortat ended up on Isaiah more than a couple of occasions, but they were aggressive off the pick and roll, the blitz pick and roll, whatever the case may be. They were up into him, end quote. Now, it also helps Washington, those we've talked about the last 2 months. Beal and Wall played a ton of minutes, but now with 2 days rest, they can help them and go deeper in these games. Even in the Game 4 blowout, though, the Wizards, the bench was a disaster again. Bogdanovich -8 in 22 minutes. Jennings -10 in 17 minutes. Mahinmi -13 in 12 minutes. But the worst fear for Stevens and the Celtics, Wall was 15 of 42 shooting in the last 2 games. They won by a combined 46 points anyways. Oh, no.
Yeah, I mean, you make a case, you can make your argument who's the best player in this series. My money would probably be on John Wall in that regard. So when Wall doesn't shoot particularly well, he facilitated his teammates very well, but 15 of 44 from the floor, just 3 of 11 from 3, and Washington's winning those games by 46 points. That's not good news for Boston. What might be good news for Boston is the fact that this is the first time all year that Isaiah Thomas is coming off back-to-back games in which he was held under 20 points. This game has Thomas explosion written all over it in that regard. Not a guy any team has been able to shut down repeatedly this season. But let's go back to that time to prepare. Because, for a team like Washington, with those short rotations, with a bench that hasn't gotten the job done. Although, Mahinmi has a chance to make their bench better. He wasn't particularly good in Game 5, but Game 4, I should say, they needed him back on the floor. And I would think that his numbers may improve as the series progresses. But when you take the benches out of the equation, how much better have Washington starters been? Look at this graphic with the net point per hundreds. And I used Marcus Smart on this chart because he's not starting, but he's played more minutes than any other Celtic that's coming off the bench or starting. But the minutes, look at it. 1+ after the next for the Wizards starters, 1- after the next for the Celtic starters. Washington has had the better frontline talent in this series.
What do you think with this round now that 15 of the 17 games have been decided by double digits and how this series has been nothing but blowouts? Would you like to look at the home team? Or what do you think? What's your lean on this one?
As this series progresses, much like we talked about with when we were previewing Houston, San Antonio yesterday, as you get into Game 5 and Game 6, the home court is worth less and less, generally, as these series progress. So I'm not in a rush to lay points with the Celtics here, despite the quote-unquote bounce-back situation. We had a very competitive game last night, and I wouldn't be surprised if tonight's game is every bit as competitive. Remember, Game 2 went to overtime, so there has been one down-to-the-wire game in this series. This could have the feel of a second one.
Up next, the National Football League team previews. We'll start with the Arizona Cardinals. Their win total 7.5. 2 years ago, they won 13 games and went to the NFC Championship game. We'll discuss them coming up next. And 5 in a row? 5 or 6 in a row, we look to make it with the play of the day on SportsBit. Betting Insight today on SBRPicks.com.
Research before you bet. Be sure to check out SBR Picks for the best game predictions, breakdowns, and much, much more.
Wrapping up on SportsBit, follow us on Twitter at Pauly Howard at Teddy_Covers. Time for the National Football League. Before we get to the play of the day, we start our team previews in the NFL, keep you in the know about what happened in the offseason, attack it from a win total standpoint and a hardcore breakdown. Most previews start in the East, not here. Left Coast bias for us. We'll start on the West Coast with the Arizona Cardinals, lined at 7.5 wins last year. 7-8-1 straight up, 6-10 ATS, 10-6 to the over, 7 straight overs to close out the season. What was this, Teddy? Plus 56 point differential, but still had a losing record.
Yeah, they had by far the best point differential of any team with a losing record in the NFL. Only 6 NFL teams were higher. Now let's let's set the stage here for a minute. All right, with these team previews, and we will do all 32 of these over the course of the summer months. All right, we talk about where the broader markets are with the win totals, but we don't have broader markets on the win totals right now. All we have still, is the South Point. I'm assuming we're going to see numbers in the next couple of weeks, hopefully sooner rather than later. But for now, hey, let's go to town using the South Point numbers. 7.5 as the opener. And that was a number that surprised me. I thought we would see Arizona 8.5, maybe 8. I did not expect a 7.5, especially when you talk about that point differential. And when you look at what happened last year, they went 2-4-1 in games decided by less than a touchdown, so they weren't very good in the close games. The games they lost to Buffalo. They lost to Minnesota when the Vikings stunk. They lost to the Rams. They lost to New Orleans. They lost to Carolina. All disappointing teams in the midst of 500/sub 500 seasons. They were favored in 12 of their 16 games. Although it's worth noting, they only had one cover in the 4 times they were a dog. That was the Week 16 upset win at Seattle. But the 7 straight overs to close out the season, when you look at their offseason moves, that's not what Bruce Arians and company wants for this team in 2017.
Yep, before we do that, mainstream stats, turnover margin, 0. They were 28 takeaways, 4th in the NFL, and 28 giveaways. 2nd in offense in yards per game, 2nd in defense in yards per game. And that's why the pros were on these guys every week, because they loved their stats and their metrics. They led a league average rushing team 4.3 yards per carry, but only allowed 3.6 yards per carry on defense. Key stat here, what happened? I know you can go in depth here with the wide receivers not doing their job and getting open. They were dead last in yards per pass. They were 24th in yards per pass, but in 2015 they were 1st and led the league, Teddy.
Yeah, and if you want to look at one stat, that's the stat that tells you why the Arizona Cardinals were a money loser last year. The running was fine. The defense was okay. They were fine with the takeaways. They weren't great at protecting the football, but the passing game that was so good in 2014 and so good in 2015 wasn't last year. When you're talking about a 1.6 yards per pass drop-off from one year to the next, going from number 1 in the NFL to number 24 in the NFL, that's a huge move downward and something that the Cardinals need to fix. But, their defense suffered some pretty big losses in the offseason as well when you talk about key veterans going away, and that another reason why Arizona aligned as a sub-500 team.
Minter gone, Jefferson gone, Swearinger, Campbell, Cooper, and Okafor. Top draft choice is Reddick. The kid from Temple and Baker will play right away. And what's the plan? I thought they were going to take a quarterback in the first round. They wanted Mahomes or Watson. Other teams were aggressive and made the moves. Kansas City and Houston moved up in front of them. Palmer will turn 38 before the season's through. Stanton's his backup. He's 33. They have an elite running back in David Johnson. What else do they have? You might say Fitz, but he's a possession receiver at this point.
Yeah, look, when you're losing 5,000 defensive snaps, read those names again. Kevin Minter, Tony Jefferson, Swearinger, and Calais Campbell. Big names on the defensive side of the football. And you bring in a Reddick and a Baker. The top 2 draft choices, both of whom are going to help on that defense. But the other guys they signed defensively, win now guys. I was a little bit surprised. Anthony Bethea, Carlos Dansby, aging veterans on the defense. You have some concerns in the secondary, probably more than any other factor, a secondary that was not particularly good last year. Patrick Patterson's great on the one side, but they have safety questions, and at least they have some competition for the other cornerback job, and the nickel cornerback, Justin Bethel, Brandon Williams, and the rookie Rudy Ford, all coming in to try to shore up that secondary. But, the quarterback position, I have to call it unsettled. Palmer, when you're talking about 38-year-old QBs, and Palmer is not Tom Brady, and he's never been Tom Brady. And when you talk about QBs that have been good NFL quarterbacks at the age of 38 or higher, not many of them. Stanton was awful, last year. He's been awful in every recent chance he's gotten to come in and back up Palmer. Last year, 39% completions, more interceptions than touchdowns. The third stringer, Zach Dysert, can't play. He's a low upside third stringer. So, yeah, you got David Johnson as the elite running back. But you're right about Fitzgerald. 9.6 yards per possession last year. He does not stretch the field. You have a bunch of guys with questions. J.J. Nelson, John Brown, Jaron Brown. Brown's coming off a torn ACL. John Brown's coming off surgery to cut a cyst off his spine after major health concerns last year. So Arizona's receiving core, they need a playmaker. They didn't have one last year. If they don't find one this year, it's going to be problematic.
This will help. Phil Dawson signs a 2-year deal. He's their new kicker. They had a ton of issues. Remember the Sunday night game against Seattle? Forget about it. And the special teams were a disaster for this team. How about the strength of schedule, Teddy?
Well, last year, one of the top 5 easiest slates in the NFL, which made their season that much more disappointing. That being said, this year, it's only slightly tougher than last year. Still well below average in terms of strength of schedule based on this year's season win totals, not based on last year's how many games they won and last year's roster. All of my strength of schedule numbers and all the strength of schedule numbers we're going to give on this show right here on SportsBit are based on this year's win totals. That's what matters for SOS, not the mainstream stats. But of course, we don't have a lot of books to go with. I don't have a great average here with the win totals. But at first look, it's not a brutal schedule. They face the AFC South. They face the NFC East, the 2 extra games at Detroit and at home versus Tampa Bay. It's a situation where they may have some early struggles. Their first couple of weeks at Detroit, at Indy, back-to-back road games, then Dallas. An 0-3 start is going to be a problem for this team. They got to steal one of those first early games before that Monday nighter against the Cowboys.
Should go 4-0 against the Niners and Rams, right?
In theory, they're supposed to. They lost to the Rams last year. And when you project the divisions, I'm always when I take a look at an elite team in a division, I'll never project them more than 5 wins. Really hard for teams to sweep in division. It happens, but it's not easy. Arizona's not that type of team. You would project them, if I'm going to project them in division, I'm going to project them with 3.5 or 4 wins. No higher than that.
Okay, very good. Tomorrow, the LA Rams. Looking forward to that as well. Money time, play of the day. Let's make it 5 in a row. Stay red hot. Betting number 519, 520, Wizards-Celtics, over 215. Only 2 games in 6 days. Both teams will be fresh and in attack mode, especially Beal and Wall. Washington doing their part. Celtics didn't help out the last couple of games, but still, that went over in Game 4. I think you'll see a high-scoring game. Remember, one thing Barkley gets right, the supporting cast and the others always play better at home. Celtics, Wizards, over the total. All right, back tomorrow. LA Rams, more big game breakdown. Can the Rockets force a Game 7? And we'll talk about the 2 Game 7s on ice in the NHL on SportsBit. Betting Insight today on SBRPicks.com.